Tonight, we descend into the blackest chapters of ancient Rome, the twisted, forbidden world of Emperor Caligula, where absolute power unleashed unimaginable sexual depravity, particularly against the women of the empire. In an era where women held little autonomy, bound by patriarchal laws and societal expectations, Caligula's reign amplified their vulnerabilities into a nightmare of exploitation, humiliation, and terror. We'll uncover how his obsessions turned noble matrons, sisters, wives, and daughters into mere instruments of his whims, shattering lives and legacies in ways that still horrify us today. Before we begin, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments. And if you support real stories like this, hit subscribe to help us keep these stories coming. Now, let's dive into today's story. Imagine the year AD 37. Rome erupts in joy as a charismatic 24-year-old, Gaius Julius Caesar, known as Caligula, claims the throne. The people hail him as their savior after the dark reign of Tiberius. He cuts taxes, frees the innocent, floods the streets with gold and spectacular games. For a breathless moment, hope shines bright. Women, especially those in the elite circles, might have breathed a sigh of relief. In ancient Rome, women were already second-class citizens, unable to vote, hold public office, or even control their own property without a male guardian. Marriages were arranged for political alliances, and adultery could mean death for a woman, but little consequence for a man. Under Tiberius, rumors of depravity on Capri had circulated, but Caligula's early benevolence promised change. Then comes the turning point. A brutal illness strikes. Fever, seizures, perhaps madness itself. When Caligula rises from his sickbed, the Golden Prince is gone. In his place stands a monster, one whose sexual atrocities would disproportionately target women, exploiting their societal powerlessness. To fuel his sadistic games, ancient chroniclers like Suetonius and Cassius Dio reveal the horrors that followed, painting a vivid picture of how Caligula's depravity ravaged women's lives. He plunged into acts that shattered every Roman taboo, starting closest to home. Open incest with his three sisters, Agrippina the Younger, Julia Livilla, and especially his favorite, Drusilla. These women, born into the imperial family, were already pawns in Rome's political chessboard, married off for alliances and expected to embody virtue. But Caligula twisted familial bonds into something grotesque. At lavish banquets in the opulent halls of the Palatine, while his wife reclined above him on the couch of honor, he positioned each sister in turn beneath him, engaging in forbidden acts right in full view of stunned senators, nobles, and guests. The ultimate violation, blood with blood, was paraded as an assertion of supreme dominance, reducing his sisters from imperial princesses to objects of his lust. Drusilla suffered the most intensely. Rumors swirled that Caligula had ravished her even before coming of age, caught in the act by their grandmother Antonia, who tried in vain to intervene. He later forcibly removed Drusilla from her lawful husband, Lucius Cassius Longinus, treating her openly as his consort and empress. This wasn't mere affection, it was possession. Drusilla, like many Roman women, had no legal recourse. Her body and fate belonged to the men in her life, and now to the emperor himself. When she died in AD 38 at just 21, possibly from illness or even poison amid court intrigues, Caligula's grief bordered on madness. He declared a period of mourning so severe that laughing, bathing, or dining with family became capital offenses. In a blasphemous escalation, he deified her as Diva Drusilla Panthea, erecting temples and demanding worship empire-wide. For the women of Rome, this set a chilling precedent. Even in death, a woman's legacy could be warped to serve a tyrant's obsessions. But Caligula's atrocities against women extended far beyond his bloodline, preying on the wives and daughters of Rome's elite. In an era where a woman's honor was tied to her chastity and her family's reputation, Caligula weaponized sex to dismantle both. Suetonius details how he transformed sections of the imperial palace into a virtual brothel, summoning noble matrons, senators, wives, and their young daughters under the guise of imperial invitations. These women, accustomed to lives of relative privilege, but ultimate subjugation, arrived in their finest stolas only to face degradation. Caligula inspected them with cold detachment, like slaves at the Forum Boarium market, lifting chins to scrutinize faces, appraising figures beneath flowing garments, selecting the one who piqued his interest. The chosen woman was led away briefly, violated in private chambers, then returned to the gathering where Caligula would boast aloud of her performance, detailing her physical charms, her flaws, her eagerness or resistance, while her husband or father sat frozen nearby, humiliated and utterly powerless. Refusal was not an option. In Roman society, women were expected to obey authority figures, and defying the emperor meant not just personal ruin, but the destruction of entire families. Caligula often followed these assaults by issuing divorce notices in the absent husband's names, forging documents that entered public records and branded the women as adulteresses. This legal maneuver stripped them of social standing, potentially leaving them destitute or exiled. One infamous case involved Laulia Paulina, wife of a consul. Caligula heard of her beauty, summoned her, divorced her from her husband, bedded her, then dismissed her as frigid, ruining her reputation forever. Another victim, Caesonia, became his fourth wife after he forced her from her previous marriage while she was pregnant. Yet, even she wasn't spared his cruelties, enduring his whims until her brutal murder. The psychological terror was profound. At mandatory orgies, during grand feasts, women of the nobility were compelled to participate alongside their husbands and children. These events devolved into chaotic spectacles where boundaries dissolved amid flowing wine and enforced debauchery. Caligula's sadism intertwined pleasure with pain. Women who displeased him might face torture before or after violation, their screams echoing through marble halls. He impersonated gods like Jupiter or Apollo to justify his acts, claiming divine right to seduce or assault, blurring blasphemy with brutality. For Roman women, already navigating a world where rape was often unpunished if the perpetrator held power, this imperial endorsement normalized atrocity. Historians note how Caligula targeted virgins, daughters of senators, deflowering them publicly to assert dominance, leaving them scarred and unmarriageable in a society that prized purity. These excesses weren't isolated. They reflected and exacerbated the era's systemic oppression of women. Under Roman law, like the Lex Oppia, which restricted women's luxuries, or the Patria Potestas, giving fathers life and death power over daughters, women were perpetual minors. Caligula's reign amplified this, using sexual violence as a tool of political control. By humiliating senators through their wives and daughters, he eroded the Senate's authority, turning personal violations into public spectacles that broke spirits and alliances. Whispers of his acts spread through the empire, instilling fear in women from all classes. Slaves endured similar fates without record, while freed women and provincials faced arbitrary summons. The long-term scars were generational. Children born of these unions carried the stigma, and families fractured under the shame. What fueled this monster? Ancient sources blame that pivotal illness, perhaps encephalitis, or lead poisoning from tainted wine, warping his mind. His youth on Capri, witnessing Tiberius's rumored pedophilic excesses, likely desensitized him. Unchecked power did the rest. Caligula declared himself a god, demanding worship that extended to his bedroom conquests. Yet his reign of terror lasted only 4 years. By AD 41, the Praetorian Guard, led by Cassius Chaerea, himself mocked and possibly assaulted by Caligula, conspired his end. In a palace corridor, they stabbed him over 30 times, his blood staining the stones. His wife Caesonia, begging for death beside him, was slain, and their infant daughter, Julia Drusilla, smashed against a wall. The women closest to him paid the ultimate price in the backlash. History remembers Caligula as the epitome of tyrannical excess. His sexual atrocities against women, a stark emblem of how power corrupts. While some tales may be exaggerated by later historians like Suetonius, writing under safer emperors to vilify predecessors, the core truths endure. In that era, women's bodies became battlegrounds for imperial madness, incest, forced prostitution, ritual humiliation. These weren't just personal sins, but systemic assaults that exposed the fragility of female existence in ancient Rome. Sleep uneasily tonight, knowing that in the cradle of Western civilization, such horrors against women flourished under a crown. This is grim history. The darkness of the past reminds us. Vigilance against power's abuse is eternal, lest history repeat its grimmest chapters.